Okay, so let's see if this works then. Okay, so I was saying the basic anatomy of CSS is that you've got what are called rules, and they're split into two parts, one of which is the selector and the other which is the declaration. The selector is referencing or hooking onto certain elements or classes or IDs or other things within the HTML in order to tell the browser what it is you'd like to format, what it is that you want to change the style of. So I want to change the way the H1 looks, the heading 1, so I'm going to use H1 as my selector. Or I want to change the way the class, the jobs class looks, or the job class, whatever it is we did in the HTML. Then there's a way to select for that as well. So there's different kinds of selectors. We'll learn them, if not all of them, quite a lot of them. Then the declaration is what formatting you want to do to the H1 or whatever it is that you're selecting for. So the declarations are split up into properties and values. The property is the aspect of the thing that you want to style, and then the value is the thing you want to change it to. So for instance, there's a property called font size with a dash, a hyphen in between. Pretty much whenever you've got two words that are turning into one term, you connect them with a hyphen. That goes for CSS and also goes for HTML. Font dash size is the property, and I want to change that. So my property is font size, and then I can put some value in for the value of that. I can say I want this to be 20 pixels. So it'll take 20 pixels tall between, from the cap height down to the descender line, I believe. Or I can say I want this to be 3 M's or something like that. There's different units of measurements that you can use. But that's basically just how it works. For those of you who've worked with JavaScript at all, the CSS rules look a lot like object literals in JavaScript, except that you do not need to put quotes around stuff. And the curly braces have that keyword right before it, which is the selector. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these. We'll do font properties first, and then there are text properties, and then there are a few other odds and ends to do with type formatting. We won't get to do all the type formatting. Whatever we don't get to tonight, I will do for the recording for Thursday. So I'll take tonight's thing and either push it a little further or make a new document and show more advanced stuff in there. And then after that, on Thursday and Friday, we'll explore other stuff beyond type formatting, like box model stuff, which is spacing and borders and things like that. And then eventually we'll get on to doing layouts and dealing with hyperlinks and images and things like that. When we get to the hyperlinks and images, we'll be doing the HTML and the CSS at the same time. That's what I found kind of odd about the book, and that's what I'm now hoping will be a good way of doing it. So even though we're into CSS, there's more HTML to come. Okay, so let's go ahead and I believe I'm sharing the entire screen. Let me know if you guys cannot see what I'm talking about. But I've got, let's see here, where am I? Unit 4. So this is all that's in here right now. This is called the root directory. As you guys probably know, it's the root folder. It's the folder in which everything goes. Into this folder, before I do any coding, I am going to create a subfolder inside of here. This is not necessary when you're working with so few files. If you've got just an HTML file and a CSS file, you could just have them both sitting inside the root directory. But I think it's a good idea to start thinking about directory structure right off the bat, as I've said. So I'm going to create a new folder inside this Unit 4 root directory. And
do you mean to be presenting?
Oh gosh, I am not. Thank you. That would help, wouldn't it?
And were you going to record? Did you find out about that?
Yes, I'm recording using the Logitech software that I've got on this machine. I did find out, I talked to Calvin, and he said that feature just isn't available anymore in the Classroom, either in Classroom or in the particular contract that we've got or whatever, so the license that we've got.
You can use OBS?
Say it? Oh yeah, that's the one he recommended to use. So this is the one I've already got on my machine, so I'm going to try this tonight and see if it works. And if it doesn't work for whatever reason, I'll try the OBS software and see if that's better. But I don't see why this wouldn't work. It's just the file size might get a little bit large, but I know there are online compression apps that you can use too, so I don't know. We'll get it checked out. Okay, so thank you for letting me know. That's perfect. I want you guys to do that because I will forget sometimes to share screen. I'll be happy blabbing away while you guys are seeing nothing. So do let me know right off the bat, please. Okay, so this is my Unit4 folder. I created a new folder inside of that directory. And come here. Okay, surely. Why won't trying to get it to show more options. Thank you. So I can rename this, and I'm going to call this one of two things. You could either call it CSS or styles or something like that. Oh, let's see. I can hide this thing. Good. There we go. I usually call mine CSS, but as long as it's something other than just untitled folder or something like that, right? Something that let's say you're going to hand this off to another developer or to the leader of your development team or something like that. It should be pretty clear what the subfolder is. There are going to be other subfolders in here eventually. We are going to have a fonts subfolder, which should just be called fonts. There's going to be an images subfolder, which should be called images or assets, possibly, if you also have other media files in there. So CSS is pretty common. And I am now going to open up the goofy.html in my coding environment, which I'm just using this guy here for right. In fact, I've already got it open. Yes, Unit4. And last week, I did do a little bit of CSS here within a style element. So this is one way that you can do CSS. There's really only one reason, I think, to do inline styles like this, as it's referred. Well, inline styles, you can actually do a style attribute down here inside the HTML. You definitely don't want to do that, hardly ever. But to do an internal style document like this with a style element, you really only want to do that if you really, really want to have only an HTML file and have no dependencies. So like it's not referencing any images of yours, it's not referencing any other CSS or JavaScript or anything. You just want to have a standalone HTML file. Then it might make sense to do something like this. Or just during a simple demonstration like last week. But we're going to do it a different way. We're going to reference an outboard CSS file. And there's a couple of different ways you can do that. One is you can still use that style element like I was just using. You can either put CSS code in there, or you can do an at import inside of there. If you want to know more about that, you can easily look that up. CSS at import, at being the little at sign. But let's use a link. This is what you see probably 99% of the time out there. And this is not a hyperlink where the user can click on, hypertext. It's just a link element up here in the head. Remember, stuff inside the head is stuff about the document. So with the exception of the title, the user is never going to see any of this stuff up here. Now there's a couple of attributes that need to go on here. One is a rel, which is just relationship or related or what have you. And you need to say, yeah, this is a style sheet. I don't know why they still require that in HTML5, but they do. And I'm not sure why, because I've never used like a link element for any other kind of document to bring it in. I assume that there are other kinds of documents that can be brought in with that, but I don't know what else. I've never played around with it to see. So rel equals style sheet. That's one thing. And then href. Now, href is something that will be used both on the link element, and then later on when we learn hyperlinks down here, we will also be using an href. It just stands for hyperreference. So it's what document is this referencing? And we're going to, we don't have one yet, but it's going to be inside the CSS folder, and we're going to call it default.css. It's a fairly common name. Can you guys see the code all right?
Yep.
Okay, let me get this thing done. Now, did I not have HTML preview over here last time I did a presentation? Why did
Yeah, you had it.
Yeah, it looks like it's just not trusting this thing or something. I still haven't figured out. I've been using code for a while now, and there's still stuff that I just don't get about it. Like, why is it suddenly not trusting this folder? I assume that's what's stopping the little preview thing from coming up over here, but that's okay. I'm sharing the whole screen, and so I'm recording the whole screen, so I'll just pop back and forth between here and the browser this time instead of doing the little preview over here. Okay, so let's go ahead and make this document. So link rel equals style sheet, href equals css/default.css. Obviously, this document needs to exist in order for us to find it. Let's go ahead and do it. So I'm going to make a new document here. And the very first thing I'm going to put in here is going to be a comment. I like to do, it's not really necessary, but I think it's a good idea to start thinking about structuring CSS documents right away. It might seem counterintuitive, like, wait a minute, we're just putting in a bunch of styling rules here, right? Does the ordering or the organization of it really matter? Yeah, it does. We're going to be working with pretty short style sheets for right now, but they can get very long. They can wind up being hundreds of lines of code. And if you don't have any organization to it, then it can be an absolute nightmare trying to work with those. So this is, those of you who've done C-based programming, this will not be a surprise to you. That's a comment in CSS. There is no other kind of comment in CSS. I know we would love to have like a couple of forward slashes to do a single line comment, but CSS does not have that. So it's similar to HTML that way. There's only one kind of comment, and it's the same one that's used for single line comments or multi-line comments. You can, if you want to give extra emphasis to a comment, put a couple of extra asterisks in here. This is something I like to do. And right off the bat, I just like to say what this document is. Sometimes you work with multiple style sheets, and I don't know, I think it just kind of helps the development team to have a big comment right up top to just tell them what document they're looking at. So I'm just going to say this is default.css. This part, that one's up to you. I'm not going to require that part of the organization. That's kind of that's a Bispoism, although I've seen a few other people do it.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do we need to change the language to CSS?
You don't, no. Once you save the document with a .css extension, then code will understand what it is you're coding at that point. It's just that if you choose the CSS language right off the bat, that when you save it, it will automatically supply the file extension for you. And it gives me the color coding before I've saved it, which it won't do if you haven't done that. I think that Notepad++ will be the same way. So let's go ahead and save this thing. And I'm going to make sure, I'm going to call this default, since that's what we're going to reference, and I'm going to put it into the CSS subfolder here. There we go. And I'm going to open up the HTML file in a browser. So I'm going back to my folder here. Here's Goofy, and I'm just going to double click on it and open it up in the browser here. This is still an unstyled document. That's not quite true. The browser is putting CSS on here already. And that's why you have things like spacing between paragraphs or italic on the address element. This is CSS that's been applied by the browser. So it's a user agent style sheet. That's how it's referred to. So let's go ahead and modify our CSS here. Now, something I like to do right off the bat, I'm going to be deleting this almost immediately. But I like to just do a test and make sure the CSS file is actually working, right? Now, there are ways to do that in the browser. You can open up the console and look at the network and so on, see if it can find it. But an easy way to do it is just to select everything. This is referred to sometimes as the splat selector or the asterisk selector if you want to be more formal about it. This will select everything. So this is a universal selector. That's the selector, and the rule takes place within these curly braces. And very often you want to open these up onto a multi-line like this. But for now, I'm just going to keep this as a single line, and I'm just going to do color : red. Now, before we check this, let's take a look at what this looks like. So this whole thing is the rule. This is the selector. This is the declaration. This is a property, and this is the value. So remember, the property is the attribute of everything, in this case, that you want to change, and then the thing that you want to change it to is red. You want to change the color and put this color. We'll look more at colors later on, but for now, I'm going to save that and go back over to the browser. Remember what I was saying about checking things in the browser. Don't keep closing the tab and then going to the folder and opening it up again. Leave it open in the browser. I'm saying this because I've seen all kinds of people do this. Just leave it open in the browser and then do a Control-R, and that'll refresh. That's all you need to do. If you want to do a force refresh, if in case the refresh is not working, you can do Control-Shift-R. But Control-R should do it. And you should be seeing something like this. Your text should have turned red. And obviously, this is not a color I would ever want to use in a web development, except maybe with like a really, really important alert, like error message or something like that. Even then, I would think twice. So this is just to make sure that things are working. Back here in the CSS, I'm just going to go ahead and delete this. If you wanted to, you can comment it out. You guys already know, if you've done coding before, you can comment out code, right? So it's not just to provide notes for yourself. If there's some stuff that you've written and you want to disable it, but you don't want to delete everything, if I want to get this back later maybe, or think I might, then just go ahead and do a multi-line comment and comment it out. But I know I'm not going to need to get this back, and if I ever do, I can code it. It's easy enough. I'm just going to go ahead and delete this. I save, go back over here, my formatting disappears again. Now I have confidence that everything is working. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these properties then. So the font properties, and here I will put these into a comment just so we can have kind of a list while we're working to kind of reference. So these are some of the more common font properties as they're used. There's font family is probably, I don't know if it's the most important one, but it's certainly the one that you generally tend to do first. And this is the one to choose what kind of font you want on here. Now by default, this thing is a serif font from long old convention and precedent. They use Times or Times New Roman, depending on which one you have on your system. And it is important, just as an aside, all the fonts that are seen on here on any web page are fonts that are available on the user's machine unless they've been stored on the actual website server. So you can't just specify, okay, I want to use, I don't know, Gill Sans on my web page and expect that that's going to show up on user's machine. If they have Gill Sans on their machine, it'll work. If they don't, then you would have to do a special CSS property called @fontface, and you would have to actually store that font on your server to be downloaded by the user when they get there. Don't have to worry about that stuff yet. Just for now, know that this font is being supplied by my machine and not by the web page. As you might expect, I mean, this is not being run through a server either. So font family, and as a result of what I was just talking about, you try to stick with fonts that you think most users are going to have. You also use something called a font list or a font stack, where you can specify multiple typefaces. So if the user doesn't have the first one on the list, the browser will look for the second one, and so on. So we'll look and see what that looks like in just a few minutes here. Font size I already mentioned, and you can specify all different kinds of unit of measurement in CSS. EM is the one I'm going to be pushing you guys to use the most often. There's also rems, there's pixels, you can use centimeters, inches, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff you can use. Usually either pixels or ems or rems, those are going to be the most common one. I'll tell you what they mean as we go through it. Let's see, font weight. This is just, do you want something to be bold or not? And there actually is other stuff that you can do besides bold and normal, but those are the ones that you usually use. Those are ones that usually cover most use cases. Font style, if you want something to be italic, or if you don't want it to be italic, you can specify a value of normal. And then in addition to these, there is a shorthand property that's just called font, where you can take some of these guys together, and it's like I said, it's a shorthand. You can include several values in the same property as long as they're done in a certain order. So let's go ahead and try some of this stuff before we go any further. By the way, this is not an exhaustive list. Another one I can think of off the top of my head is font variant, but that's not something that you use all that often, I think, is to specify small caps. I think these are the ones that you wind up using a lot. So I'm going to, I remember I was saying that I wanted us to start thinking about structuring this. And I don't really have any orders about how I want you to structure it necessarily, just that it's structured so that you're thinking about it and that you structure it in such a way that you can easily find the rule that you're looking for, or at least fairly easily. So I used to organize my CSS by different kinds of selectors. I don't really do that so much anymore, but I did do it for years. the way I'm going to do it for this demo and probably for the rest of the week is I'm just going to organize things by the kinds of elements that we are trying to select for. And I'm going to name them by having a comment up here above each one. And I'm going to call this one like structural. And by that I mean things like the body element, the big page div, the header, the footer, the article, right? Those big structural elements that we learned last week. And then I'll probably have another one for type formatting. Now, to some extent, whenever you try to organize things, they tend to kind of bleed into each other a little bit. And I don't know if there's any real way around that. At least when you get to the point where you're refactoring your code and trying to make it as clean and concise as possible, sometimes they're just going to spill into each other. Even so, if you can keep that to a minimum, that's good. Maybe later on I would have another section that I label navigation or gallery images or something like that. So I'm already starting to think about how I'm going to do this. So I'll start with the structural ones. And I'm going to do here, I'll go ahead and make the first rule and we'll talk about what it means here before we take a look at it. So I'm going to select for the body element. Now these are just type selectors, so all it is the name of the element itself. So right now I'm selecting for this element in the HTML. Now the way CSS works, I'm going to put the brackets in there right away because I tend to forget if I start talking in the middle of typing. The way CSS works, it stands for cascading style sheets. And if you've used Word before, or definitely if you've used like InDesign or something like that, you know what style sheets are. Basically, a style sheet is just a saved collection of formatting rules, right? So if I'm in Word and I want to take an element or a paragraph and turn it into a first level heading, I can do that up in the top bar. I can drop down and select H1, and then it's got a certain set of formatting characteristics that have been applied to H1. So that's what CSS does too. It is a style sheet in that matter. The cascade is something that is very different about CSS. The cascade is something that, as far as I know, word processing apps and page layout apps just don't have. And the cascade is something that we're going to have to break up the discussion of into multiple pieces because it is it's kind of a breathtaking thing, actually. It's really an amazing way that this language was conceived right off the bat. But basically it has to do with if there are conflicts between two rules or two different formatting statements, which one wins? Which one wins out over the other? And for now, I'm only going to have you guys try to remember a couple of things. And one of them for today is that there are some properties that are called inherited properties and other ones which are not inherited properties. And what inherited property means is if I apply formatting to the body element or something else, that formatting will be applied to all the descendant elements of the body. By descendant element, I mean any elements that are nested inside of the body, right? Like the page div and the header and the H1 and the H2, these are all inside the body element, right? So if I'm using inherited properties, I can apply those properties to this top level and they will cascade down to all the other elements in here, and that formatting will be applied to everything. Properties that are not inherited do not do that. And most, if not all, of the type formatting properties that we're going to be doing today are inherited properties. So if I apply some type formatting to the body element, that should apply to all the text all the way on the page as long as it's contained and nested inside the body, as long as it's descendants of the body element itself. And then we'll see an example of something, maybe either tonight or on Thursday, of a property that is not inherited. But I'll try to let you guys know as we go forward and learn some of these properties exactly. Yeah, this is inherited property. This is not an inherited property. But like I said, I believe all the ones we're going to do tonight, with the exception of border, if we do one, these are all inherited properties. So let's go ahead and try it. Here's the body element. There's the selector, and there's the rule brackets. I'm going to open this up, and I'm just going to say font family. That's the first one on our list up there. So it's the rule, or sorry, the property here. Notice the hyphen, right? Font family, then there's a colon, and then the value that I want, followed by a semicolon. So for instance, font family Georgia. Now Georgia is another very commonly possessed typeface. So almost all user machines are going to have Georgia on it. So you can use it with a fair amount of safety. And it's, unlike Times, this is a typeface that was actually intended for screen presentation. So let's go over here and open up the browser, and I'm just going to refresh. And all of a sudden, I just like it better. It's a subtle difference, maybe, but I think that Georgia is way more readable on screen than Times. Not in print necessarily. In fact, I would think Times would probably be a little more readable in print, but screen presentation has to deal with these pixels, and for reasons that we won't really go into because we don't have time, but this one's just better designed for screen presentation. They're designed to be shown through a meshwork of pixels. That's it. Now, I'm going to, you guys don't have to do all these comments, just do the ones that you think are useful to you. I'm going to talk about what a font stack is, and we're going to use one right here. So a font stack is simply where you specify more than one typeface. Separated by commas, you can do a whole list of typefaces here. And then what'll happen is, so let's say I did Georgia and then comma Times. So the browser, we're looking through this and say, okay, I'm going to look on the user's machine for Georgia. And if they've got it, then I'm going to use it. If the user does not have this on their machine, then I'm going to skip that one, and I'm going to go Times instead. And if they don't have that one, maybe there's a third one on the list, Times New Roman. Notice we don't need to put this in quotes. I mean, code is recommending that we do, and it might be considered a good idea, but it should be fine without it. I used to do a long font stack back in the day when users, especially on Windows, just didn't have very many fonts on their machine, and you really had to watch out for what you listed here. But these days I've shortened it down to something like this. So I just do something like Georgia and serif, and I'll say, yeah, so this is like, yeah, grab Georgia on the user's machine, and again, most people will have Georgia. And what this says here, this is not the name of a typeface. This here says to the browser, use whatever, if the user does not have Georgia, then use whatever serif typeface is listed as the default serif typeface on their system. So if Georgia is missing, then it will go to the next one, which will probably be either Times or Times New Roman. So that's what a font stack is. It's generally considered to be good practice to use a font stack, even if it's a short one like this, and even if I expect, yeah, most people are going to have Georgia, I probably don't need to worry about it. Later on, when we do at font face to use custom fonts, we'll lengthen this a bit. We'll have the name of our custom font here, backed up by our nearest preference for the backup, and then the generic one here. So that is font family. And let's go ahead and try, well, actually, we already did this, didn't we? So rush over here. Notice that we applied it to the body, but that formatting is being applied to all the elements that are inside body. That means it is an inheriting property, and we are seeing the cascade of cascading style sheets at work. Now, what we can do, this is also part of the cascade, is that if I now select for an element that is more specific and do something other than this, I can override this. So that's really what the cascade is. Remember I was saying it's if two things disagree with each other, which one wins? So let's say I select for footer here. So we do have a footer, don't we? Yeah, there it is. So the footer has, oh, we put the references and all kinds of stuff in here. Okay, cool. Let's give it a shot here. So footer, let's say I want to make it clear that the footer is a different kind of information from what's on the rest of the page. And say I want to do a different font family there. And I will do, say, Tahoma, which is a sans serif. And so if I do a font stack, I will do sans-serif, like that. Again with the hyphen, when you're bringing two words together into one value, use the hyphen to connect them. So let me go ahead and save this and go over to the browser and check it out. So the page is still in Georgia. If I go down to the footer, I should see from references on down is now in a sans serif typeface. So that is also the cascade at work. This rule for the footer overriding what's the rule for the body. Now I want to do a little test here. I want to change the order here because sometimes the order can matter. If you've got two selectors that have the same specificity, as it's called, and whichever one comes last is going to override the one before that. So if I go over here and refresh, and no, in this case the footer is considered to be a more specific attribute or selector. So, but I would still do it in this order because body, well, it's the biggest element. It kind of belongs at the top here. So let's see, that's with Tahoma. There's other ones you could try. Actually, Verdana is probably the most common one. If I save that and refresh over here, slightly different. Let's do some more font stuff. And let's do it to the footer here, now as long as we're working with the footer. So the other font properties that we talked about, or we put in our list up here, we've got the font size, font weight, font style, and just font. So we'll go in and work with the H1 in just a moment, but let's stick with the footer for right now. So I've got the font family, Verdana Sans Serif. Now this is the one that's going to be a little bit weird because we've got headings in here. We've got two different sizes of type, but maybe that'll wind up working because right now this feels like this is supposed to look different from the rest of the page. It's sure pulling a lot of attention down here. Let's go ahead and try doing a font size. Now, let's use pixels first. Now pixels, I don't usually recommend using pixels, but it's probably the simplest one to understand right off the bat. So let's just go ahead and try a pixel now. I'm just going to say like, I don't know, 14 pixels. The default is 16 pixels for paragraphs and other body copy elements. So let's try 14 if we want to make this a little bit smaller than the default. I'm going to save this. Font size 14px and refresh over here. And I don't know if you can even see the difference there. Let's go for something a little more dramatic. Font size 10px so you can really see the difference. And there it is. So it's taking everything down in size. Notice there's something interesting going on here. And that is that there's still a size difference between the body copy elements, the list and the paragraph, and this heading up there. The heading is still larger than the other ones. So it's kind of weird that way. Let's go ahead and use M's instead, and maybe this will make more sense with that. Now 1M, go over this, and this will take it right back to the beginning again, exactly what it was before we did anything. Think of 1M as meaning the default size of the type. So if I do font size 1M versus not having a rule in here at all, it should be the same size, right? I refreshed over here, and there's no difference between not specifying a size and then specifying it at 1M. Refreshing, no difference at all. So that's what 1M means. It means use whatever is the default size of the type anyway. So if you want to make the default size of the type a little bit smaller, or not the default size, but change the size of the type a little bit smaller than 1M, then you can use a decimal of M. So for instance, 0.8M, and of course you can lead with the 0 or not, depending on what is your preferred style. We'll do the same thing, 0.8M, and it'll take all that stuff and just make it a little bit smaller. If I do 0.7M, then it's going to be getting smaller still, and so on. That's a little bit too small. I'm going to stick with 0.8M. There we go. Hang on, I'm checking something here. Oh, I was wondering why that was italic down here, because we actually put it into an emphasis element. Okay, we may fix that later. So if you haven't worked with M's yet, it can take a little while to get used to them, and just as soon as you do, I'll introduce another one called a rem, which is going to be a little bit different from that. But for now, let's just keep it at M. I'll talk about rems when they pop up. They will at some point, maybe even tonight. And let's see, let's go ahead and make all of the footer italic down here. It's just this one thing. So I'm going to do a font style here. So I've got a font family, font size, font style, italic, and I'll go over here and refresh, and it takes the whole thing and makes it italic. If something was already italic, like I was wondering, like, okay, so why is this italicized already? I haven't done any CSS, and it's because we put an emphasis around the whole thing. if you wanted to get rid of that italic, let's make it, actually this should be down here in type formatting. You can actually target that emphasis element and you can do font style normal. I always want to do font style none, but it's font style normal. And then when I refresh over here, now it has done the opposite. So it's made the whole footer italic, but then it's taking the emphasis element and taking the italic off of there. So that's what to do if we want to override it. If you've got italic font and you want to make it normal, then you can do font style normal on it, and that will override. And as long as we're doing font style, I think we should do font weight as well. Now font weight will turn something bold. So let's say, I'm going to get rid of this pretty immediately, but let's say I do a paragraph and do font weight bold, like so, and save and go over here and refresh. Then all the paragraphs turn bold. That's not very readable, so I don't want to do that. In fact, there's really nothing on this page that I can think of that I really want to turn bold. So what I'll do instead is I'll take the H1 and take the boldness off of it. Maybe this goofy thing up here. I'll do, sorry about the scrolling. I promised I'd get a new mouse and I haven't done it yet. I gotta do that. H1. And remember how we did the font style normal here to override the italic. Well, the H1 is already bold. The browser already has a style sheet that is applying a font weight bold to this. So we can override that. That's also part of the cascade with our own CSS and do font weight normal. So if I save and refresh over here, then I've taken this bold off of the H1. You could also do it to the other headings if you wanted to, or just some of them. It all depends. So I think we've done everything in here. We've done font family in order to grab the Georgia and the Verdana, the font size within the footer to make it a little bit smaller than default by using 0.8 em. 1 em, em is the default size. We did font weight, but we didn't apply bold to anything. We overrode the boldness by doing font weight normal. And of course, we did font style, both italic for the footer and normal to override it for the emphasis element. Now, there's one more thing that I want to do with font properties. And then I'll ask if you guys have any questions or if you got lost with anything. And that is the font property itself. Remember I was saying this is a shorthand that can combine these guys together as well as any other font properties like font variants and so on, and also at least one thing that we haven't even looked at yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out on the footer, I'm going to comment out font family, font size, and font style here with a multi-line comment like so. And we're going to do these three declarations as one declaration so we can get it all on one line. By the way, there's nothing wrong with doing it like this. Nothing wrong at all. But sometimes, like I was saying, the CSS page can start feeling like it's getting a little bit long. Sometimes having a more concise way of writing something can really be a benefit. Plus, of course, saving on finger fatigue and so on when you're typing. So this is just going to be the font property, like so. Let me go ahead and put the semicolon in there. And what I'm going to do is, let me go ahead and do it correctly, and then we'll try to break it in various ways. Because one thing about doing this font property is in order for it to work, they realized, I think, when they were specifying this, is that you have to put the values in a certain order. It's going to have multiple values in here, or else it just won't work. So let's go ahead and do it the right way. I'm going to do italic, and of course the browser will know if it sees if it sees a value of italic, it knows that that's the thing for font style, right? And then we're going to do the 0.8 em. There's a space in between those values, a space on another value here, and we're going to do the Verdana sans serif. So if I save that and go over here and refresh, the formatting is still there, right? let me go ahead and let's make sure it's not just like stuck in cache or something like that. So I'm going to cut that for just a moment. You don't have to do this. I'm going to refresh, and the formatting for the footer disappears, except for this emphasis thing that we did. And I put it back in there. Font italic 0.8 M for Dana, comma sans serif, save, and we get all that formatting back. So this is handy. I'm going to leave this in there as a comment so you guys can see it. But very often you could just do this whole thing with one-liner type. And if you can, why not, right? So let's see what we can do to break it. So let's say I take off the Verdana sans serif from the end. I'm going to cut this, and I'm going to put it at the beginning. So it says Verdana sans serif italic 0.8 M. I'm going to save this, and I think, well, the ordering probably doesn't matter that much. Let's go ahead and try this and see. It should work. And, oh, nope, all the formatting just disappeared. The type size disappeared, the font face disappeared, the italic disappeared, everything disappeared. So this is the first rule of this font property, and the ordering of the values for it is the specification of the typefaces and the font stack needs to happen at the end, because there's no way that it can make sense of this comma otherwise, right? There's no way for it to know that this is not another font name and that this is not another font name, right? So the font stack has to go at the end. So I'm going to Z back out of that. Let's go ahead and take italic here and exchange its place with 0.8 M. So it's 0.8 M, then italic, and then the font stack. So now it's working except for the italic part. It changed the size and it changed the font. So even this, I mean, it'll partly work this way, but it's not completely. It's not taking that italic anymore. So you got to start with the font style, and then I believe it's the size, and then I believe the font weight comes after that if you're going to do it. Let's try it here. Let me see if I put bold and refresh, and no, that's not working. So I don't tend to use bold for this, so I can't remember what the exact ordering is. Maybe it's right after this one. Yeah, there it is. So font style, font weight, font size, and then font family. You put them in that order. I don't actually want that bold on there. I just wanted to see what the ordering was. So there we go. This is the font property shorthand for these guys and more if you want them. And I think that we are done with the font properties for the moment. Yeah, we've used all of these in turn. I think we've explored the whole thing. So any questions about what we've done so far? Or any issues pop up? Or did anything not work for you? Definitely let me know. If you're trying something and it doesn't work in the browser and you don't know why, definitely let me know. We'll take a look at it. All right.
What did EM mean?
So in the HTML or in the CSS, because they're two different things.
In CSS.
In the CSS, an EM, is the default size of the type. It's called that because once upon a time, hundreds of years ago, it used to be equal to the width of a capital M. That's where it got its name from. But for the time being, in here, just think about it as the size of the type, same as the size of the type. So body copy in browsers is rendered at 16 pixels almost always. And so if you specify the size of the type for a paragraph as 1M, it'll be 16 pixels. And if you tell it to be 1.2M, then it'll be the next size up from that, 19.2 pixels, and so on.
Okay.
If you don't get it right away, you're not alone. But you just kind of have to work with it a little bit. But yeah, it's the size of the type. And I think we saw that that's different for, different sizes of type to start with. So for instance, this H2, I guess it was, starts out larger than the list in the paragraph. And so when we specify these to be 0.8 Ms, there's still hierarchy there. This is 0.8% or 80% of its original size, and this is 80% of its original size, and they wind up being different from each other still. Okay, cool. Let's take a look at text properties. So I will put this in a separate comment. Okay, text align. This is where you can do different alignments for text. There's left aligned, which is the default for type. There's right aligned. There's justify. If you want the paragraph to like have an alignment line on both sides and fill out a solid block, I don't think we really have enough text here to do that sort of thing with the goofy resume. And that's one of the reasons I was thinking about doing a different demo later this week with like more paragraph text on it. But anyways, there it is, the text align. There's text indent is probably used the most often. Then a text indent is it's a first line indent. So when you first use it, you might be thinking, well, it's going to take the whole paragraph or the whole block of text and push it in from the left. But it actually just does the first line. If you wanted to push the whole paragraph or the whole block of text in, that's a box model thing. We'll learn about that in a couple of days. We do margins and padding and borders and so on. Text indent, and this one may not be as commonly used as the other ones, but I still want to put it in there because I think it's important. Text transform. This is not nearly as cool as it sounds. All it does is it takes some text and it makes it all uppercase. And the reason why I wanted to show that to you is because all too many people put uppercase content into their HTML because you think, well, I want the big H1 to be in all uppercase, but you just do it like in regular title case, and then text transform, the CSS property, will put it into uppercase for you. So all caps is actually a formatting thing, which means it belongs in the CSS and not in the HTML. So I think this is a shorter list, but I think these are the big ones here. So let's see. Yeah, let's go ahead and go to the H1 again. So I'm going to pop down here to my H1. We did font weight normal already. Let's do a text align. So let's say I want this big heading up here, H1, to be in the middle of the page and for it to be center aligned. So I will do text align. Look at all these. I mean, when you do this in here, you see all the text properties there are. I mean, there's a lot. But these are the few most commonly used ones, I think. Text align, and let's do center. So I save that, and I go over here and I refresh, and we put it in the middle of the page now. And let's see, they're going to let me pull this thing off of here. Yeah, so let's go ahead and make this into something that's a little bit more, I don't know, mobile sized here. So having something centered like that would actually make sense. There we go. Now, of course, we could do it to the entire heading if we want to. The trouble is that I don't think I want this aligned. Let's go ahead and try it. I don't think that's what we want, but let's go ahead and put a selector for the header. I'm going to double check the HTML. And the header, I was just looking at it. Yeah, the header contains all of this stuff here. So if I go ahead and create a header selector and do text align center and go over here and refresh, notice first of all it puts all the headings that are inside headers in the middle, which wouldn't be the end of the world. I think in a mobile view that could work okay. This guy right here, this multi-line text, center line text is not very easy to read. For headings, it's fine, but not so much for body copy here. I don't think it's the end of the world. There's not that much text to deal with, but still. What I might do instead here, I'm going to get rid of this. And down here, I started doing the text align center on the H1. So if I go over here, it's just the H1 again. Let's say I liked having those H2s in the middle. Well, what I can do is I can also specify an H2 and do a text align center, like so. And I think that's better. I'm still not wild about it, but it's better than having this centered here. So a lot of the success of your CSS and it doing what you want it to do has a lot to do with your selectors, choosing which selector to use. Now I'm going to do a little bit of refactoring here. And refactoring simply means that if I've got, and those of you who've done coding before know exactly what refactoring is probably, it is when you've got repetition in your code and you want to try to normalize it a little bit so that you get rid of some of that repetition. Now it's not always doable or convenient to do, but when you can do it, You should. So for instance, I've got in the H1 text-align center. I've got in the H2 text-align center. That's a bold repetition. There's one right above the other one. I know I want to refactor that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get rid of text-align center from the H1. So if I save that and refresh, now the H1 is, that's weird. What happened to the H2s here? Let's see. Text-align center. There we go. I don't know what I did, but sometimes it can just be like a semicolon's missing or something like that, and it can just kind of break everything after that. So here, now we've just got the H2s, and the H1 is not. But here, let's do our first compound selector. I wasn't even planning on doing these tonight necessarily, but let's go ahead and try it. So a compound selector is where you can select for more than one element at the same time. So I can select for an H1 and an H2 here, and all I need to do is super easy. Just do each selector name that I want, and then separate them with a comma. H1, H2. Some coders don't ever put spaces in between those. It's just a readability thing, whichever one you prefer. So H1 comma H2. If I save that and go back over here, notice it's working again. And I've now refactored things. I mean, my selector is a bit longer down here, but I've saved a lot of text by removing one of the text-align centers from here. So that's known as refactoring. Let's go ahead. I'm going to put a multi-line comment up here. I'm going to say this is an example of one, refactoring, and also compound selector, like so. So that is the H1 and H2 here with the comma in between. There was something else. There was another text element I wanted to do the H1. Oh, right. I wanted to do it all uppercase, right? So let's say I want the word letters Goofy to be in all caps here. Here's another text property. And let's do text transform and call it uppercase. And you can override it just like we did the font style and the font weight. If you put normal in there, you can override it if you've already got uppercase on something, but not if it's hard-coded into the HTML. So text transform uppercase, refresh, and look, there it is. It's all in uppercase, so I didn't have to type it in all caps in my HTML, and you don't want to. Please don't. Somebody will. I guarantee it. It's going to happen. And when you do, I'm going to give you a hard time about it because it's really intended for formatting, which means it goes in the CSS. There is no need to do all caps on anything in your content, in your markup. Leave that alone. Okay, so let's see. What's the one we haven't done yet? We haven't done text indent, and I'm trying to figure out what's a good use for this guy here, and I don't think I really have one on this one. Text indent, like I said, is a first-line indent. So if you have word wrap or line wraps here, it's only going to grab the first line and indent it. It's not going to wrap or indent the rest of it. But let's go ahead and try one anyway, just so you can see what it looks like, what it does. And what I've done occasionally in the past is I've indented paragraphs so that they have the same level of indent as these lists. Notice that the list has been pushed in from the left edge of the document in order to make room for these numerals here and for these bullet points here. The indenting is the same level here, it's the same place. And in most browsers, I believe it's 2.5 em or 40 pixels. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to take just the paragraphs, let's say, and indent them by 2.5 em so that they match those lists there. I don't think it's going to look very good, but let's give it a shot anyway. Okay, so that is type formatting. It's going to be down here. Why do I put it in between those? I don't know. It's just the way I think of the biggest elements up here in the hierarchy, the text hierarchy, I mean, down to smaller elements in the text hierarchy. Emphasis is actually an inline element. It's inside of a paragraph. And so I personally wouldn't put it up at the top here. But again, how you organize is up to you. I'm just explaining why, like I didn't just put P down at the bottom here, why I'm putting it in between those two guys there. So I think that, you know what, I think we're going to need to do another compound selector, but let's start with a paragraph here. And the last text property of the list that we haven't done yet is text indent. Text dash indent, colon, and then the value we want, I'm going to try the 2.5M, I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And then I refresh over here, and yeah, these guys are now entered the same amount as the text in those two lists there. Now you can see it only gets the first line. That's why I'm saying I don't think this will look very good. But yeah, there's two other things. Let's go ahead and pull out our little mobile view here a little bit so we're not getting the line wraps, so maybe it doesn't look quite so bad. Let's say it's more of a tablet view here. There we go. We're cheating a little bit. So now it should be clear, like, oh yeah, that's lining up now with the list indent here. But there's a couple things happening here. The address is not indenting along with the paragraphs. So I want to do a compound selector here. I'm going to do P, comma, address. So remember, this is a compound selector just like the one up top here. So it's going to select for P, paragraph, and address element, which is this guy here. So when I refresh, oh, doesn't look very good, right? It's only getting the first line. So yeah, we'll see better examples of text. Text in it, it's actually a really important property. It's just with a page that doesn't have very much text in it, it's not as useful. But I'll go ahead and leave it in there for right now. Now, there's another thing that I'm going to point out. And for this, I'm going to bring this in again for a mobile view. If you take a look at these paragraphs are all lined up in the same place, but then this last paragraph here, it's not. Where it says letters of recommendation, it's actually a little bit to the left of everything else. And when you see that sort of thing, it's because, remember, we resized this type down here. This type is no longer 1M, it's 0.8M. And when you do that, an M changes down here as well. An M is a smaller amount now here. And so in CSS, they have added another unit of measurement to help out with this sort of thing. Now, if you were confused by M, this one might really confuse you. But let's go ahead and try it. And I'll show you how it fixes what we're looking at here. Now, this is a paragraph that's inside the footer. So let's do another kind of compound selector here. And I think I'm going to put it up here. So we've got the footer up here. And remember I was saying that there's going to be some bleeding back and forth here. And I'll also do two different selectors here. This time they're only going to be separated by a space. They're not going to be separated by a comma here. But what this means, if there's no comma, this one means select for H1 and an H2. This one says select for a P that's inside of the footer. And it actually shows, like VS Code is actually showing us here. Yeah, it's the paragraph that's inside the footer here. The other thing to note, by the way, it's talking about selector specificity. This is, like I mentioned, how specific a selector is. That's a cascade thing. We'll talk about that later on. So a footer P without the comma, just a space, selects for the paragraph inside the footer. And let's do text indent. Instead of 1M, which is what it is right now, let's do 1rem. I'm going to save that and refresh, and oh no, I did 2.5 M's, don't I? So sorry, not 1rem, 2.5 rems. I was like, wait, what's going on? Ah, there we go. And now it's lined up with everything else. So what is the difference? Okay, so if you were already, if your head's exploding at the M, don't even listen to this next part for right now. You'll get used to it later on. But if an M is the size of the type, a rem is the original size of the type. It's the size of the root document on the HTML page. So that's why if you specify this to 2.5 rems instead of M's, it ignores the current size of this paragraph and just says, okay, well, what's the base size for everything? Oh, it's 16 pixels, so I'll do 2.5 times that. And then that's what makes it line up with everything else here. Now, let's do some refactoring. I've got footer P, text indent 2.5 rem, and down here I've got P and address text indent 2.5 M. Well, I bet I could just use rem down here and get rid of this entire thing up here. Let's try it. Save, go over here and refresh, and yep, everything's working just the way it should, including the little paragraph inside the footer down here. So this is actually really useful, the rems. Ems have been around for a long time in CSS. Rems are much more recent. Those did not come along until CSS 3, and maybe, I can't remember for sure, maybe not even the first release of the CSS 3 specification. It might have happened a couple years after that. I'm not sure. I'd have to look that up. But it can be very useful when you just want to have a unit of measurement that's applied to everything equally. Now, of course, we could just do 40px, and that should do the same thing, lining everything up just right. So yeah, if you want it, I have done it before. I push the use of ems and rems whenever possible because they're relative. That means that if I come along here, if the user comes along and resizes the type, the indent is more likely to stay proportional to the type, whereas if you do pixels, it may not as much. So, but if you really struggle at first to remember what ems and rems stand for or figure out how to use them, then of course you can use the pixels. But I'm going to keep pushing the ems and rems in my demos and recordings. Okay, I think that's it for the text elements for right now. Again, there are a couple that we did not do, but these I think are the big ones that you use a reasonable amount of time, especially the indent and the line was used constantly. Any questions about those guys or some of the foibles that we ran into in the process of using them on this document? Okay, folks, we're getting there. There's only a few more here that we're going to do today. And let me go ahead and just label these and call these font properties. You guys might want to do the same thing here. And then these are text properties. No, go away. And I'm going to do one more comment up here for our last list. And I'll call this one other type formatting properties or something like that. And these are some of the other ones that you use regularly that don't fit into one of these two categories of starting with the keyword font or starting with the keyword text. So one of those, probably the really big one, is color. You can change the font color, but it's not a font color property or a text color property, it's just color. The reason why is because the color property will format more than just the type. If you have a border on an element or an underline on type or something like that, it will also format that as well. And we may see that tonight. So the color property, that one gets used quite a lot. And then line height is to specify leading, so line spacing, space between the lines. That one can be very useful. I find, generally speaking, like this line height here, by default is an extra 20% of the size of the type, so it's 1.2 ems. I find that to be kind of tight. I like to add a little bit of leading, especially to body copy. And that's done with the line height property. Let's see, what else? We've got list style or list style type. That's probably the one used most commonly. And then I suppose I'll add this one in here too, letter spacing. There we go. Come on, it's a comment. Stop trying to do that. Okay, so 4 of those guys. We have 5 font properties, including the shorthand. Text properties, by the way, there is no shorthand text property as far as I know. And then these guys are the others that don't fit into either one of those categories. So let's start with color, because that's the big one. We'll go ahead. I'm going to specify one color for all the type on a page. And remember about the cascade. Remember that these properties that we're doing today are inherited, which means I do not need to go through each selector and change the color of it if they're all the same color. All I have to do is specify color on the body selector, and it will cascade down. It will inherit to all the elements that are underneath it. So let's go ahead and do that here. So a color is specified in one of several different ways. There are English-based color names. There are hexadecimal colors, and there are RGB values. Or there are other things too. There's CMYK values, there's grayscale values, there's RGBA, which includes transparency. There's all kinds of stuff you can do now. Let's just do those first three. So an English-based name we've already seen when we were testing the CSS document to make sure that it was being sourced correctly and everything. We did color red on the splat selector, right, the universal selector. So there are English-based names that you can use. So let's say I do like color, I don't know, steel blue. So probably be a little bit too light. Generally speaking, you have to be careful making your text blue. Why? Because people expect blue text to be clickable, right? You have to use a pretty dull blue in order to get away with it. This one is probably, yeah, this is too light of a blue. To me, this is already getting into danger. Like people think all this stuff is clickable now because it looks like hyperlinks. So there's a place you can look under W3 Schools for a list of HTML color names. If you just Google HTML color names, it'll probably be the first thing that pops up. And you can look at something to see if there's a darker blue. Maybe there's a dark steel blue or something like that that might work. Or you can start working with some of these other types of values that can give you more control over it than just the color names. I think the color names, there are like, I think there are 216 of them, I believe, just the English-based color names. I tend to like to use the ones that I know off the top of my head when I'm doing demos, but when you do like actual work, you very seldom use them because you've got actual branding colors that need to be used, and they tend to not fall into that little short list of 216 colors. So let's go ahead and do a hexadecimal color. So this one will be another dark, dull color, and it's going to be blue. And hexadecimals start off with the hash sign. And like the name implies, with hexa means 6, right? So there's going to be 6 digits here. So let me go ahead and create one here. Now let's try this guy and see how it works. That looks pretty close to the steel blue, I think, off the top of my head. I'm going to save this and go over here and refresh. And yeah, it's just a bit darker and duller. So to me, this is already much better. Darker against the white background, easier to read, and it doesn't look as much like links, right? I don't expect this to be clickable. You could make it a bit darker, again, go away, by making all of these numbers a little bit smaller. So I did 446688, 324466. Then it's going to be a darker and duller blue still, and that's starting to look pretty good there. So what is a hexadecimal number? Well, a hexadecimal is a way of expressing 256 levels of something within each of these two values here, or these 3 values, I'm sorry. So basically, for those of you who are familiar with RGB color, all this is the first pair of characters here. The first pair of digits is the red channel. So this is how much red there is, and it can go from 0 all the way up to F. So the numbers are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F. And the reason why it switches over to A instead of 10 is because 10 takes up 2 digits, and we've only got 2 digits to work with. So like you might see something like that, like 2A. So you could see some numbers in there, or letters in there as well. They'll never go up above F, or obviously lower than 0. So the first 2 numbers are the red channel, and then the next 2 numbers are green, and then the next 2 numbers are blue. Now, if you're thinking, well, God, I'll never get used to those, it's actually not that hard. Just at a glance here, I can see that there's more blue than anything else. There's more blue than there is green or red, and there's more green than there is red. So this is going to be a blue, and it's going to be a slightly green-leaning blue. And it's going to be pretty dark because all the numbers are pretty low. And so there we go, dark and dull. So you'll get used to those. I mean, even if you choose not to use those coding, as you look through the source codes of other people's websites and web pages and so on, you're going to see it being used out there. So let me comment out that one. And let's do something similar using RGB colors. So RGB, it looks like a function, and I guess technically it is. But let's go ahead and see what it looks like. So color, in this case, instead of using the hash, you use the RGB keyword for red, green, and blue. and then parentheses following it, and then you can put in the values for these. Now these values go from 0 to 255. Each one can have 0, which is none of that color, all the way up to 255, which is blasting that color. So let's say we wanted to have an insanely blasting red here, like we did for the beginning. In fact, this might be even more saturated than that. We could put 255 for the red, and then 0 for the green and 0 for the blue. And if I save that and go over here and refresh, and yeah, there's that nasty, nasty red that we would never ever want to use. So that's like all red and no green and no blue, which is what gives you that really blasting. God, I got to figure out the preferences on this thing. Okay, so let's kind of match at least roughly what we did upstairs there. So we're looking for a dull green-leaning blue, fairly dark. So we know that there's going to be a little bit of each, but there's going to be more blue than either of the others, and there's going to be more green than there is red. So start out with a low number and then go up a little bit from there. So let's try like 60, 80, and 100. I don't know, that might be a little too dull. Let's see. And refresh over here, and yeah, it's pretty dull. Let's go a little bit further here. Let's put 100 and then like 120 for the blue. Yeah, it's getting there. That might be a little bit too light, but yeah, that's the idea. So RGB values, again, red, green, and blue. Same thing with the hexadecimal, red, green, and blue is the idea. Or to start with, you can just use the English color names. And we can also do a line height here on the body element, and that will inherit down. It will cascade down to all the other elements. So let's say I do line height. Now remember, the default is 1.2 ems. After a while, you'll just remember that. It's 1.2 em for this default line. So if you want to make it a little bit bigger than that, go a little bit larger. So let's say instead of 1.2, we do 1.4 em. I'll make it a little bit more visible here. I like 1.4 a lot, but I've used 1.5 before. So if I go over here, and here's a paragraph with multi-lines, and then there's also these lists and the address up here and so on. If I refresh, see how it just spaced everything out a little bit? Gave it a little bit more breathing room. Not much. You don't want to go crazy with it. I did like too much when I was first starting out with my design work. Like, oh yeah, I love line height. Yeah, it's hard to read that way. 1.5 or even 1.4 is probably a good starting point for your line height. And I think, let's see, what else did we put in that last list? Oh, we did list style type and letter spacing. Okay, so very quickly on each of those, I know that we're coming up on 7:25 already. It's okay. I promise I will give more time to work on your stuff on Thursday, because we'll have, I mean, in a way we had to do this because the recording for today was still HTML. We have to do the CSS stuff to get you guys launched off. So let's see, we've got letter spacing. So I am going, a lot of people like to do letter spacing for the really big stuff. And normally I don't, except this one thing happening here, the F and the Y are kind of crashing into each other, which I don't really care for. So what I'll do is I'll go to my H1 selector, which I've already got here, and I'll just do a little bit of letter spacing. So letter spacing, you wind up using much smaller numbers than what we've been doing so far. So for instance, watch what happens if I do like 1em here or something like that. I'm going to save it and refresh, and like, oh my goodness, that looks really, really bad. It's for letter spacing, we're talking about the space between each individual letters. You don't need much at all. Like, let's try 0.1em, which is 1/10 the size of the letter spacing that I just did. Okay, that looks better. And you might even want it to be less than that. You might want to do like 0.05em or something like that. Just really small amounts, just enough to get the F and the Y broken up a little bit. Now, like I was saying, normally I don't even do this with the large type. That was the only reason why I did. Usually I'd like to do it with the small type here instead. So if we have like really bitty type down here, actually this isn't too bad. You guys can probably see that just fine. But I might go to the footer and give it a little bit of extra letter spacing as well. And I'll do the same amount, 0.05em. And when I go over here and refresh, try that again. Yeah, it added just a little bit here, not much. But with really small type, like legalese and so on, down at the bottom of the page, it can help to add a little bit of letter spacing like we did here. Okay, last thing, I want to show you about list style types because I know that you've got some lists in your resumes. So that's this guy right here. And very often there is like the font shorthand up here that can encompass these different font properties. There is a shorthand for this that's just called list style, so often you'll just see it as that instead. I'll do the more formal one for today, and then you'll probably see me do the other one in the future. So let's say I just want to change some things here, and I want to, let's say the skills. I want to change the list formatting on the UL here. So it's an unordered list, so it's got the bullet points in front. But let's say Goofy really thinks, you know what, I really want these to have an order because I think comedy is the most important one of them, and then slapstick is less important, and tune training is the third most important. So it really should be in an ordered list, except I can't change the HTML. So I can change it in the CSS. So let's go ahead and try. I'm going to select the OL, this is the only one on the page. And I'll put it down here under type formatting, probably here. So I'll select just the UL. And let's do a list style type. And I'm going to start out by doing none, just to show what that looks like. List style type none. And I go and refresh, and it takes the bullet points off. Otherwise, everything's the same. It's still a list, right? But if you need to take the bullet points off of a bulleted list, then you can. The bullets are like the type sizes and the boldness and so on. The bullet points are added using CSS by the browser. And so if you override it using CSS, then you can remove them. If I want to change it to something that looks more like a numbered list in order to make Goofy happy, let's say I do decimal. List style type decimal. And I refresh, then look. It's an unordered list. Here, we'll take a look at it in the HTML, right? Wherever it is. There it is. Unordered list, right? So it's a bulleted list, but I've just made it appear. I've given it the formatting of a numbered list instead, just through CSS. There's all kinds of other ones you can do. There's Roman. There's Latin. What are the Greek letters or numbers you can do? There's all kinds of stuff you can do. The only other one I'll show you right now is decimal leading 0. This guy right here. Sometimes you want a decimal that starts with a 0, like so, and you can do that as well. But there's a whole ton of other ones. If you look under the CSS documentation under the MDN, of which there is a link in like the useful links page on the classroom, then I'm sure you'll find an exhaustive list. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do with that. It's actually kind of fun to play around with it, but I'm not going to do it right now. It's already 7:30. So we did a ton of stuff today. Luckily, we had an HTML document ready to go. We explored these different font properties, and I think all of these are commonly used. And the font property shorthand here is especially useful if you want to make your code a little more concise. 3 text properties, which are used very commonly. These 2 especially, I wanted to show this one just to dissuade you guys from adding any uppercase content, all uppercase content in your HTML, because now you know you can do it using your CSS. And then some other type formatting properties that are not included in these, and I think that these are probably the most important 4 out of those, especially the first 3. Use those a lot. And that is it, I suppose. There's one more thing that I can do. Let's say I'm done entirely with this style sheet, and I know I'm not going to be recoding it at least anytime in the future. Sometimes what I'll do is I will take any rules that only have one declaration in them, and I'll collapse the code blocks. This is totally up to you whether you want to do this or not. And I never do this until I'm sure that I'm done coding something, because if you put it on, what almost guaranteed you're going to at some point want to add another declaration, so you're going to wind up having to break it open again. But like when a project or a page is done or whatever, you can really shorten this up. I don't do that for like the multi-line ones, of course, just the ones that only have one declaration, and I guess that was it. And the rest of them I'll leave as open code blocks. And you could also, if you want to, like put an extra line space in between each to make it, you see how easy that is to read now? That's one reason why I like to do it. It just shortens everything, makes it more concise. Totally up to you whether you want to do it. Okay, any questions about any of the stuff that we just did? Or I should say all the stuff that we just did. We just did a lot of stuff. Did any of it not work for anybody? Okay, make sure to let me know if it did not. If you don't feel comfortable speaking up in class, a reminder, I've got a 50-minute office hour right after class on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so I will be here tonight. Stick around or pop back in. I will be here until 8:30 guaranteed. If the thing is on, but you don't see my face here, I'm either out of the room and I'll be right back, or sometimes I've got this other machine right up here that I'm also doing stuff on. So sometimes I'll just set this off to the side and I'm actually right over here. So just say something out loud and I'll probably hear you. Okay, I've got the reading up for tonight, or for Thursday rather. Chapter 4 we're into now, getting into CSS. So I've marked off the parts that I think are most important in there. You can look that up. Let me know if there's any questions. Remember to turn in your HTML resume so that I can start checking those out. I still don't have the grade structure finalized. I've been working on it. I plan to have that done sometime tomorrow. So once I do, if you see some change in the points for the stuff that you guys have already turned in, that's what that means. Where we're going with it next is to take your CSS or your HTML resume, create a CSS page for it, and then apply some CSS font, or not just font properties, but type formatting to it. Obviously, you can use this as a guide, what we just did, but I do not want to see one that looks exactly like this. Okay, make sure that you're doing your own document so that your resume does not look exactly like your fellow students. Okay, but you can use these same properties. You may be using different selectors or different collections of these properties with each selector, what have you. Also, hang on to the one we just did. This is the in-class demo. I will have a submission folder for this now. Again, I apologize. I should have all this ready to go before the start of the term, and I just didn't because I didn't have it clear in my own head. Now it's clear. There will be submission folders for everything within the next couple of days. So hang on to this. This is this week's in-class demo to start with, and then we'll have another in-class demo either Thursday or Friday where we'll do a little bit more with CSS. We'll do box model properties next. That will probably take us through Friday. And then next week, we'll be doing layouts and working with images and hyperlinks and so on. It's just a rocket fast class. It really is. We've got a lot of stuff to cover in a very short amount of time. So if you get confused or stuck, make use of those office hours, okay? I'm here. I'm here to help. I very seldom have anyone show up for those. So I'm just kind of here doing stuff. I love to take a break from whatever I'm doing and help you guys out. It's like my favorite thing to do. So don't hesitate. Okay, I am going to, don't leave just yet. I'm going to stop the recording.